You walk into a marble building in the heart of ancient Rome. The floor beneath your sandals glitters with mosaics, geometric patterns, sea creatures, even mythological figures staring up at you. The air is damp, and somewhere below you hear the trickle of water flowing steadily through hidden channels. The smell, while not exactly pleasant, is far less offensive than you'd expect in a city of 1 million people. And then your eyes land on it. A long, gleaming stone bench runs the length of the room. Dozens of perfectly rounded holes are carved neatly in a row. And they are occupied. Men sit shoulder to shoulder, their tunics hitched up, chatting animatedly. Some discuss gladiator fights they witnessed in the Colosseum. Others gossip about a senator's scandalous affair. One merchant, in the middle of relieving himself, is haggling over the price of olive oil. This isn't a nightmare, this isn't a comedy sketch, this is real. Welcome to the Roman toilet. Now you might be wondering, wait, people actually pooped like this, together, in public? Yes, they did. And here's the strangest part. Rome, one of history's most powerful, wealthy, and advanced civilizations, built an entire sanitation system around this practice. These weren't just holes in the dirt. They were engineered, maintained, and integrated into Roman daily life. Today we're diving into one of history's most overlooked but fascinating topics, where the ancient Romans pooped, and how on earth they kept it clean. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a bathroom the same way again. For most Romans, the bathroom wasn't a private escape. It was a public event. The Roman city was dotted with latrinae, public latrines, often built near marketplaces, bathhouses, and forums. If you were looking for the ancient equivalent of a restroom stop on a busy day, chances are you'd find one attached to a bathhouse or lurking just off a bustling street. But these weren't grim, foul-smelling pits like you might imagine. Many were decorated spaces. Some had marble benches polished smooth by centuries of use, tiled floors that caught the lamplight, even mosaics that depicted gods, dolphins, or geometric designs. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of examples. In Rome itself, in Ostia Antica, its great port city, in Pompeii, in Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, and even in remote outposts of Britain and Gaul. The design was clever. Picture a long bench with evenly spaced keyhole-shaped seats, set above a constantly flowing channel of water. Beneath this bench, another stream carried waste away, often into the sewer system. In front of the bench, at the user's feet, ran a shallow gutter of cleaner water where people could rinse their cleaning sponges. But what stuns modern visitors most is this. There was no privacy, no cubicles, no partitions, no attempt to shield yourself from the man or woman next to you. Yes, that's right. Men and women often shared these spaces. The ancient world did not always divide its bathrooms by gender. Though some latrines may have been designated, in many places it was simply communal. Imagine walking into a room where 20 strangers are seated, all relieving themselves in plain view. Imagine trying to strike up a casual conversation while the unmistakable sounds of digestion fill the air. For us, it seems unimaginable. But for Romans, this was normal. Why? Because Romans didn't have the same concept of bathroom privacy that we do today. To them, the latrine was an extension of public life. Just like bathhouses where people soaked, scrubbed, and gossiped together, toilets were places of social interaction. You could discuss politics, share gossip, or negotiate a business deal while on the seat. Some latrines were even elaborately decorated to encourage this atmosphere. At Ephesus, archaeologists uncovered a communal latrine with marble seats, elegant columns, and even a roof to keep out the weather. In Ostia Antica, a latrine with seating for over 20 people has been found, suggesting these were major gathering places. At Housestead's Roman fort, on Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, the remains of a military latrine show rows of seats where soldiers once sat together, proof that this practice extended to every corner of the empire. Public latrines were essential for the health of the city. By the 2nd century CE, Rome's population had swelled to nearly 1 million inhabitants, an astonishing number for the ancient world. Without public toilets, the streets would have been completely overwhelmed with human waste. The latrinae, tied into Rome's extensive sewer system, provided a way to keep at least part of the mess contained. Of course, that doesn't mean they were pleasant. The smell was ever present. Rats and insects scurried through the drains. And lurking beneath it all was a superstitious fear that spirits could rise from the underworld through these openings. In fact, some Romans prayed to Cloaca, the goddess of sewers, to protect them while they sat. Still, the latrine was part of daily life. For most Romans, when nature called, this was where you answered. But not everyone wanted to, or could. Of course, not every Roman was comfortable doing their business in front of an audience. While the masses squeezed into public latrines, the rich enjoyed a very different reality, one that offered privacy, comfort, and status. The private toilet. In lavish villas and urban townhouses, small rooms were set aside as private latrines. These were often tucked near the kitchen, not the most appetizing placement, or close to the baths. They usually consisted of a single stone or wooden seat over a pit or drain. The wealthiest homes even connected these seats directly to the sewer system, allowing waste to be flushed away. Some private toilets were surprisingly elegant. They could feature tiled floors, painted walls, and even decorative niches. In Pompeii, archaeologists have uncovered toilets inside houses with frescoes still intact on the surrounding walls. Imagine relieving yourself under the watchful eye of painted gods or mythological creatures. But make no mistake, a private toilet was a status symbol. It meant you didn't have to mingle with strangers or sit in a row of 20. You could do your business in relative comfort and seclusion. For senators, aristocrats, and wealthy merchants, privacy was just another luxury, like heated baths or fountains in the courtyard. Still, by modern standards, these private rooms were far from luxurious. They were small, dark, and rarely offered complete isolation. They were, however, a step up from the crowded public benches. But what about the poor? The majority of Rome's population didn't live in spacious villas. They lived in insulae, apartment blocks that loomed several stories high. These insulae were often overcrowded, poorly constructed, and dangerously flammable. Plumbing was rare. Toilets were almost non-existent. So how did ordinary families relieve themselves? The answer was as practical as it was unpleasant. Chamber pots. Each household typically kept a clay pot for this purpose. After use, the pot was emptied, sometimes into a cesspit or dump, but often straight out the window into the street below. Yes, Roman streets frequently doubled as open sewers. The practice was so widespread that laws had to be passed forbidding it. Roman jurists even recorded legal cases involving people injured, or even killed, by chamber pots being dumped from above. Imagine walking home at night only to be struck by a sudden downpour of something you'd rather not think about. The smell in these districts must have been overpowering. Streets clogged with garbage, animal manure, and human waste were a daily reality. Disease was a constant threat. For these poorer Romans, public latrines offered some relief, literally. They could leave their insula, walk to the nearest bathhouse or forum, and use the communal toilets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was better than a pot under the bed. And yet, despite the discomfort, this was life for the vast majority of Rome's population. The contrast between the poor tossing waste into the streets and the elite enjoying private toilets in marble villas tells you everything about inequality in ancient Rome. But beyond the city's poor and its pampered elite, there was another group that couldn't be ignored: the Roman army. And they too had their own way of dealing with nature's call. The Roman legions were famous for their discipline, organization, and engineering, and that discipline extended even to toilets. Archaeological excavations of Roman forts across the empire, from Britain to the Middle East, reveal carefully constructed latrines for soldiers. In a typical camp, wooden or stone seats were lined up over ditches or channels of running water. Waste was flushed away just as in the cities. Some camps even had water channels specifically designed for cleaning sponges, showing that hygiene practices followed the army wherever it went. Why was this so important? Because poor sanitation could devastate an army. Soldiers lived, ate, and marched in close quarters. An outbreak of dysentery could cripple a legion. By building proper latrines, the Romans kept their soldiers healthier and their armies more effective. And just like in civilian life, these latrines were communal. Soldiers sat together, no partitions, no privacy. It was simply part of Roman culture. So where did the Romans poop? Everywhere. In crowded public latrines, in private villa rooms, in clay pots tossed into the street, and in disciplined army camps on the frontier. But that still leaves the bigger, and perhaps more fascinating question: how did they keep it all clean? Because for all their brilliance, we're still talking about an ancient civilization without toilet paper, bleach, or modern plumbing. And yet Rome managed to build one of the most advanced sanitation systems the world had ever seen. That's where we turn next. Now that we know where Romans did their business, let's answer the bigger question: how did they keep it all clean? The short answer is engineering. Beneath the marble streets of Rome ran one of the greatest feats of ancient urban planning, the Cloaca Maxima, or greatest sewer. Built as early as the 6th century BCE, originally under the kings of Rome, it was expanded and maintained throughout the Republic and Empire. This massive stone tunnel carried stormwater and human waste out of the city and into the river Tiber. At first, it was little more than a giant drainage ditch meant to dry out the marshy land between Rome's hills. But as the city grew, it transformed into a living, breathing artery of sanitation, public latrines, private toilets, baths, fountains, and street drains. All were connected, channeling dirty water downward into the Cloaca Maxima. Imagine walking through the Forum, seeing sparkling marble temples and bustling markets, while beneath your feet, rivers of waste quietly flowed out of sight. The genius wasn't just in size, it was in maintenance. Roman engineers sloped the floors of sewers carefully, allowing gravity to do the dirty work. They lined walls with stone and concrete to prevent collapse, and they built access points where workers could descend, unclogging blockages. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. Waste entering the Tiber didn't just disappear. It polluted the river. Many Romans still drew water from the same river for washing or cooking, but compared to most ancient cities, or even medieval Europe 1,000 years later, Rome's system was revolutionary. Think about it. At its height, nearly 1 million people lived in Rome. That's the population of a modern megacity. Without some way to manage human waste, the city would have been unbearable. The sewers were what allowed Rome to thrive without drowning in its own filth, and Romans were proud of it. They even built a shrine to Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer. Imagine an empire so committed to sanitation that it literally worshipped its drains. But let's zoom in. From the massive sewers of the city to the intimate act of cleaning oneself. If you asked a Roman, what did you wipe with? The answer might shock you. The tersorium, a sponge on a stick. Here's how it worked. Beneath the benches of a latrine in front of your feet ran a shallow channel of clean water. After finishing your business, you'd take the communal sponge, dip it into the water or a bucket filled with vinegar or salt water, and use it to clean yourself. When you were done, you rinsed it out and left it for the next person. Yes, it was shared. For us, this sounds horrifying. The idea of using a sponge handled by dozens of strangers in a single day feels more disgusting than going without. But for Romans, this was practical and normal. They believed the vinegar water disinfected it, and hygiene standards were, of course, different from ours. The tersorium was so iconic that Roman writers joked about it. One famous story by Seneca tells of a Germanic gladiator who escaped execution by seizing a toilet sponge and choking himself to death. A grim reminder that even bathroom tools could become weapons in Rome. But the sponge wasn't the only tool. Archaeologists have found pessoi, small ceramic or stone discs likely used like toilet paper. Greeks used them too, sometimes inscribed with the names of enemies. In other words, wiping with your rival's name was an ancient form of insult comedy. The sponge on a stick, however, was the star. It reflects how Romans thought communally, not individually. Bathrooms were public, cleaning tools were shared, and privacy simply wasn't part of the equation. So while we recoil at the thought, for them, it was just another part of daily life, no more strange than sharing a bench in the bathhouse. Still, sponges alone weren't enough. Cleanliness in Rome went far beyond the toilet. Enter the bathhouse, one of Rome's greatest social inventions. Nearly every town, from the capital to the smallest frontier settlement, had at least one. These weren't just places to scrub off grime. They were the heart of Roman daily life, where people relaxed, exercised, did business, and cleaned up after using the toilet. A typical Roman's hygiene routine looked something like this. Use the latrine, wipe with the sponge, then head to the baths. There, you would sweat in the hot room, rinse in warm pools, and finish with a plunge into cold water. Slaves and attendants might scrape your skin with strigils, removing sweat, oil, and dirt. The baths functioned like a second line of defense against filth. Even if toilets weren't perfectly sanitary, regular bathing helped prevent disease and gave Romans a sense of freshness. It's no accident that the rise of Roman public health coincided with the spread of baths and aqueducts. For the first time in history, millions of people could access clean, running water on a daily basis. But what about the streets? After all, not everyone used latrines properly. As we saw in the insulae, many Romans dumped chamber pots out of windows. To combat this, laws were passed against throwing things out into the street. But laws are only as good as their enforcement, and many ignored them. This is why sewers and street cleaners were essential. Rome employed public slaves called forcicarii to maintain latrines, and curatores cloacarum to oversee sewers. These were dirty, thankless jobs, but vital. Without them, the city would collapse into chaos. At night, carts carried waste out of the city, sometimes to fertilize fields. So even excrement had its place in Rome's economy. But for Romans, cleanliness wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. The goddess Cloacina, mentioned earlier, wasn't a joke. She was genuinely worshipped, with offerings made at her shrine near the Forum. Protecting the sewers was seen as protecting the health of the city. Other deities, like Hygeia and Salus, embodied health and sanitation. The connection between ritual purity and physical cleanliness ran deep in Roman thought. So while they didn't understand germs, Romans did see hygiene as a civic and religious duty. To keep Rome clean was to honor the gods and preserve the empire. Now let's put this in perspective. When Rome fell, much of its sanitation collapsed too. Medieval Europe returned to chamber pots, filthy streets, and rivers choked with waste. Private toilets vanished. Bathhouses closed, often condemned by church leaders as sinful. In fact, some scholars argue that sanitation in London around 1300 CE was worse than in Rome around 100 CE. The Romans, for all their flaws, were centuries ahead in urban hygiene. Even today, when we flush a toilet, we're echoing their system, water carrying waste into underground sewers. Our modern sanitation is more advanced, but the basic principle is Roman. So the next time you sit in a private stall, with toilet paper in hand, consider this. 2,000 years ago, someone in Rome sat on a marble bench, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, wiped with a sponge, and relied on a sewer goddess to carry their waste away.